And now to someone who's not just an elder statesman, he's the eldest statesman of Malaysia. And this week, on the 10th of July, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad turns 100, becoming, by the way, the youngest of 3 living former heads of state who have reached 100 years of age. Dr. Mahathir was Malaysia's Prime Minister for 24 of the 61 years since it was formed in 1963. His first stint as PM was in 1981 and it ran for 22 years. And then, remarkably, he became Prime Minister again in 2018 at the age of 92. Joining us this morning to discuss Mahathir's extraordinary life and legacy is Malaysia expert Professor James Chin from the University of Tasmania. Welcome back to Sunday Extra, James.
Good morning.
It's great to have you. Now, look, I think Australians could be forgiven for only knowing Mahathir as Prime Minister of Malaysia, but he was 56 years old when he first took office. So let's knock off that first half a century with this first question, James. Could you give us an overview of Mahathir's sort of life story and how he rose to become Malaysia's Prime Minister?
Sure. So Mahathir is part of the generation of leaders that will include people like Suharto of Indonesia, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. In the Philippines, and of course Lee Kuan Yew. So basically, this was a lot of leaders who lived through colonial times, and they also saw their country becoming independent. So he belongs to a very specific generation of Southeast Asian leaders who strongly believed that their countries were mismanaged during colonial times, and they could do a better job in an independent country. The unusual thing about Mahathir is that he is not a pure Malay, unlike the other leaders. For example, Lee Kuan Yew is pure Chinese. Mahathir actually has some Indian blood. So he is also unusual in the sense that he did not belong to the ruling class in Malaysia. So all the previous leaders in Malaysia were people of royalty class or people of the high class. He comes from a very humble background. His father was merely a teacher.
Amazing. And so how then did he manage to rise to become the Prime Minister of the country?
So he managed to rise primarily because I think he had a certain level of charisma. And also he was one of the earliest Malay to be highly educated. He got a medical degree at the University of Singapore. And also I think he was very clever in the way that he played on Malay nationalism, bringing people together, primarily on this ideology of Ketuanan Melayu or Malay supremacy or Malay dominance in Malaysia. Very early on, he understood that, in order to climb the political ladder in Malaysia, he needed to play the ethnic card, and he played very, very well throughout the years he was in power.
Yes, so I suppose with that in mind and the way that's shaped his administration, could you give us your assessment, James, of Mahathir's achievements and I suppose his major failings in that first and longest stint as Prime Minister?
Sure. Well, in terms of his legacy, I think it's quite clear. The positive parts is that he has really transformed Malaysia in terms of the physical space. So everything you see in Malaysia today was built during his time. For example, the iconic Petronas Towers, the new KLIA airport, including the new administrative capital, Putrajaya, all these were built during his time. Secondly, I think it's quite clear in his 20-odd years in power, he put Malaysia on the global map. He was widely seen as a leader of both the Islamic countries around the world and also a leader of the South because he took a very strong position against Western powers. But I think in general, people will agree that there were more negatives about his legacy. So, for example, it was quite clear he truly believes in being a strongman leader, or what we might call authoritarian leader today. He believes that in order to move a country forward, the political leader must have power. So in some ways, he is very similar to Trump. The other negatives about him, as I mentioned, is the racial polarization. Because of his emphasis on Malay supremacy, this has permanently divided the ethnic population in Malaysia. But the other bad things that he did, of course, was corruption. There are lots of corruption and cronyism during his administration. But the thing that we see today in Malaysia, where his imprint is very clear, is the rise of political Islam. it was during his time in power where he tried to implement Islamic politics or Islamic rule into the Malaysian administrative system and politics. And today we're seeing a lot of, ethnic and racial conflict, primarily because he introduced it into Malaysia in the 1980s.
Thanks very much, James. That's really interesting. In terms of the relationship with political Islam, I wonder if you could also reflect on what I suppose has been the defining political relationship in the life of the current Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, and his relationship with Mahathir, because that was, I suppose, where Ibrahim came from. Could you chart the course of that sort of epic relationship for us?
Sure. So when Mahathir came to power in 1981, he was very clear on using political Islam as a major tool to stay in power. So he quickly invited Anwar Ibrahim into his government. At that time, Anwar Ibrahim was a firebrand young Islamic leader. So when he brought Anwar Ibrahim into his government, within 10 years, Anwar became the deputy prime minister. And Anwar was the one who started introducing what he calls universal values or Islamic values into the administration. But of course, they had a falling out in the 1980s, primarily because Anwar, tried to overthrow him. Anwar has made a big comeback after 25 years in the wilderness. And I think one of the reasons that Anwar was able to do it was simply because people just had enough of, UMNO, which is Mahathir's party, but more importantly, because of the huge corruption allegations against UMNO's leader, Najib Razak, the infamous 1MDB affair. But again, as I mentioned, one of his legacies is corruption, centralization of power, and this allowed 1MDB to happen.
Mahathir's return to the prime ministership must surely rank as one of the most extraordinary political comebacks of all time, perhaps before Donald Trump's return to the presidency. How and why did that happen, and why was it relatively a short prime ministership?
So he managed to get back into power in 2018 because he sort of turned against UMNO. He was really, really unhappy with the 1MDB crisis. He felt that Najib, who he helped to make the prime minister, sort of betrayed him. So he managed to cobble together an opposition. He managed to set up a new party, and he got all the ex-UMNO members to join his new party. But the reason why he lost power in 2020 was he made a deal with Anwar in 2018 before the election victory, saying that he will only stay in power for 2 years. The term of government in Malaysia is 5 years. So he promised that if the opposition won, he will only stay in power for 2 years, and you hand power over to Anwar. So Anwar has time to prepare for the next general election. But of course, once he got back into power, he refused to hand over power to Anwar. And it is quite clear that, in terms of the interviews he gave, he really truly believes that Anwar cannot be a leader of a Muslim country. Because as you know, right, the key allegations against Anwar, when Anwar was first sacked in his first term, was that Anwar was guilty of sodomy. So he says that the Muslim population in Malaysia cannot accept a person like that.
Well, I suppose the last couple of years then have proven that wrong to some extent. We're speaking with James Chin about the legacy of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad on Sunday Extra. James, Mahathir had a famously fractious relationship with Prime Minister Paul Keating, who called him a recalcitrant for not attending the APEC conference in Seattle in 1993. With that in mind, I wonder if you could comment on the Australia-Asia relationship over Dr. Mahathir's years as leader.
Sure. I think by and large, the relationships was very, very difficult. In addition to the Paul Keating remarks on Mahathir, I think there were lots of other diplomatic tensions. He never accepted Australia as part of the Asian region. If you remember, during Paul Keating's time, there was a major shift in Australian foreign policy. Australia tried to project itself as part of the region, and Mahathir never accepted this. He always saw Australia as a white outpost of Europe. And also he had a habit of calling Australia the deputy sheriff to the US. In other words, Australia was projecting Western interests in Southeast Asia. I think the other thing that he was very unhappy about Australia was that key Australian leaders, for example, John Howard, right, were attacking him for what they deemed to be anti-Semitic remarks that he's made. And I think he was really, really unhappy about it because, again, this echoes some of what his critics in the West were saying about him. But, he did lots of things to block Australia. For example, he blocked Australia in things like the East Asian Summit. But ultimately, I think that was not successful. I think many countries in the region, although they did not see Australia as fully part of the Asian region, but they understood that there was a role for Australia to play in the Asian region.
And just finally, James, how is Mahathir regarded in Malaysian politics and society today?
So I think it's similar to everywhere else. People have short memories. Mahathir is a political icon in Malaysia. So although he's going to be 100 this coming week, many people argue that he still harbors political ambition. And it seems that he's still dead set on trying to pull Anwar down or to push Anwar out of the prime ministership. He's still very influential in the sense that, whatever he says, it'll be widely reported, especially in social media. And in fact, he's one of the most widely followed leader in the social media. So although he's 100 years old, his hands is still on a political pulse, and he has a huge social media following. So I think, yes, he really is a political icon. And I'll finish my comment by saying that you really cannot write about the modern history of Malaysia without mentioning Mahathir.
No, that is absolutely the case. And, a third comeback does seem unlikely at this stage, but it has been a remarkable political career. And, James, it's been great to have you back on Sunday Extra to talk us through it this morning.
Thank you for having me.
That's James Chin, who is, of course, a Malaysia expert and professor at the University of Tasmania. Thanks very much for your texts this morning. The number, of course, for all your feedback is 0418 226 576. It's 36 minutes past 7 on Sunday Extra.
Find more great ABC RN stories that take you beyond the headlines on the ABC Listen app.